All right, so let's go ahead. So now we have Leonardo da Vinci who wrote this resume back in the day. Very appropriate. The question is, did he get the job with Ludovico? And the answer is yes. So taking some hints from him, let me ask you this question, right? What's the big deal with the resume anyway? So if we look at career blocks, these green blocks over here, as a example of our own undergrad, master's work, PhD work, and perhaps our postdoctoral work, we see that over the last 3 to 5, 7, 8 years, we have done a bunch of stuff. Like we have conducted research, gotten accolades and various awards. We have established critical collaborations, written papers, acquired a number of technical skills, and volunteered our time to various projects. So you can say that all this has led up to needing to jump over this gap from where we are now to hopefully get an interview, a job, and eventually make a career out of it. In other words, if we were to look at it differently, uh, these three blend, these three building blocks here are basically a collection of blood, sweat, and tears. And the document that gets you from here to here is essentially one of the pieces is the resume. So that is what that resume does. It's that document that lets you get from step A to step B. But why is it so important? Let me emphasize here. A resume is what captures your professional essence. It basically tells folks who you are, what you've done, and what value you bring to the table. It is the marketing document that helps employers distinguish you from any other employee, right? And of course, and unfortunately in this case, first impressions do matter. Okay. Most importantly, a well-crafted resume gets that visibility that we want to get from that green building block to that yellow building block, that is the interview. All right. So that's my take on why the resume is important. But I also want to share some personal experience of making resume mistakes over and over again, which when I was applying from postdoc to next position, committed these same exact mistakes, and that led for me to confusion, frustration, disappointment, and the further fueling of imposter fears, which is why I wanted to present this topic as the very first of this non-academic job series. All right, so we're going to address resume mistakes. And today, our approach is going to be in these ways. We're going to look at resumes from a perspective point of view, a content point of view, look and feel, and we're going to talk a little bit about post-production, and this is how we're going to approach today's topic. All right, so let's go into this perspective point of view. But before that, I want to ask you if you know, and here I'm going to launch this poll for you. All right, so if you see the poll option on your screen, let me know if you know what the difference between a CV and a resume is. So that should have shown up at your screen right now. Can you guys see it?
Roshni, I don't see it.
All right, okay, thanks for letting me know. All right. Give me a second. All right, we have some chats, not seeing the poll. All right, got it. Got it. Let me go back to screen sharing my document with you. Give me a second. I'm sharing my screen. All right, share. So answer for me, if you know, answer for me in the chat. And this is why not having a face-to-face conversation is kind of hard, but we'll make it work. Answer to me in the chat what you guys, if you guys know the difference between a CV and a resume. And later on, we'll go over some questions that people have submitted prior that have asked me what the difference between a CV and a resume is. So here we go. So let's start with this, right? Resume is basically 1 to 2 pages max. Okay. As opposed to a CV that doesn't have sort of like a length, although you don't want to write a thesis. CVs are what we submit for basically academic job search, academic positions. Okay, that's okay. Thanks for answering the poll, but it's a very basic question. I'll go over it over here. CVs and resumes are both written in reverse chronological order. So you want to start with your most recent experience. Okay, and then, unlike CVs, which are very, very comprehensive, resumes are a concise snapshot. So Vivek says in the chat that resume is a subset of a CV, and that's absolutely right. When I am preparing to start for looking for a job, first I prepare a CV, and then I sift through all the junk in my CV and create a resume. So that's what it is, a concise snapshot. Okay, and then you want to be able to present like Leonardo da Vinci did, and I'm happy I didn't say Leonardo DiCaprio because he's been basically I've been saying that a lot. It's select works only, not everything that you can think of. And I know as scientists, engineers, we like to hold on to our work, but it's not about putting everything on your resume. It's only select works. It's crisp, it's nicely formatted, it is neat, it focuses, and this whole topic today is going to be on an impact based resume or a results oriented resume. It focuses on the impact you made. It just doesn't list responsibilities blindly. It really talks about what you've accomplished. It's very to the point. And I cannot stress this enough in this whole session is it has to be customized to the industry and job description, and we'll look at it a little bit more. So I'm going to click over here and show you what the basic skeleton of a resume looks like. So you have generally your name, address, um, your email ID, your phone number. Sometimes you have your LinkedIn, link to your LinkedIn, a hyperlink over there. Then many people have a professional summary, which I encourage you to have, which is 3 to 4 bullet points highlighting everything that your resume is saying, but only the key accomplishments that you have. Other sections include education, research experience, technical skills, awards, honors, leadership skills, communication skills, selected publications. You may choose, if you have space, to add a volunteer experience, or you may choose to even include interest depending on the company that you're applying for. That adds that human touch. That's optional, and you really have to be careful where you're applying that interest section to. So if you fill in the gaps, here's what the resume looks like. Okay, this resume here is a very basic kind of resume I may receive to review. It's not jazzed up, it's just the first draft. It's even missing like a professional summary section. So here the person, that's me, has their education listed, their research experience listed, awards, mentorship, and technical skills at the bottom. Okay. So in terms of the research experience section, many times I come across this where a trainee or a student will simply mention the title of their job title. For example, you're a graduate student, you're a postdoctoral fellow, and they may mention their supervisor and they may mention their thesis, but there's no points below that. There's no indication of what you accomplished, what results you got while you were a fellow. So in that case, from an employer's point of view, I can't extrapolate to believe that you're going to be able to fulfill some of my core requirements if I don't see anything listed in your resume. So then it might have like a publication section. And in this section, there's a long list of publications. And if your name is somewhere in the middle, like over here, I wouldn't be able to tell because it isn't bolded. And many times, I do get resumes with this entire section listed here, references, and there's no space for references on a CV or on a resume particularly. So you don't want to be wasting time to add references. So you may argue that how will people know who your references are? And I would say that it is, if people are interested in you and you go to the next level, which is an interview, then the employer is going to ask for references anyway. So you don't have to list an exhaustive list of references right here. Okay. So that's how a typical resume looks. So let's go into where I'm going to even start. Now I'm looking for a job. I found a job that it fits me. I like it. Where do I start in crafting that resume, and where do these mistakes pop up? So to start off with, we're going to look at this section that I talked about, this approach called perspective. And with perspective, what I mean to say is that you have to start thinking about your resume and crafting it from an employer's point of view. Here in the moon, you're looking at the earth from the moon and not vice versa. To further emphasize what that means, mistake number one, and this I find very often, is forgetting to craft the resume from an employer's point of view. Who is your audience? It's the employer, right? So if your employer is the audience, you have to start writing and thinking about what your audience wants to see. And I'll talk about that in just a second. This poll may not even launch, but I'm going to try. All right, it's launched because I have it open on my other computer. So you guys, what I mean by employer's point of view, on average, how much time does it take for an employer to browse a resume? So the results are coming in, and I'll share with you in a second what people are saying. Right now, the leader is 9.68 seconds, followed by a tie for 6 seconds and 60 seconds. All right, so 64 of you voted, and that's a good snapshot. And I'm going to share the results with you. So 47% of you said that it takes 9.68 seconds for an employer to look and browse at a resume. Actually, that's Usain Bolt's timing for his 100-meter. That's his record. So resumes do an even recruiters do an even faster job, and they take only average of 6 seconds. So for the 22 of you, you're right. They look at your resume for about 6 seconds. So knowing that it's only 6 seconds, how are you going to craft your CV or your resume? So that's an important perspective when I say employer point of view. Now, I'm going to ask you another question, since this is the only way to interact with one another. So here's another question. Do you guys know what an ATS is? What is an ATS? So that particular poll won't run, so never mind. Okay, so that ATS stands for Applicant Tracking System. So I don't know how many of you know what an applicant tracking system is. It's a software used by many employers to sift through resumes. So one recruiter or talent acquisition person is not going through thousands of resumes for these big jobs, right? It's too much work. So what they're doing instead is that they're using the software called the ATS, where they put your resume automatically goes to this computerized algorithm, and based on the job description and based on the keywords that are occurring within your resume, the two match, and it gives the recruiter a percent match. What that means is, let's look at this. Okay, I'm going to bring up my pointer for a second. For example, over here, this person's resume has got a requisition rank of 92%, which means they're closer in match through the applicant tracking system than Shannon and Manju. All right. So if you look more closely at what that means, is if a job describes in the job description, if they mention they want someone with manufacturing skills, field service, troubleshooting, and engineering, the person who has mentioned these skills more are more likely to have a solid match to the job description. So someone who mentioned field service as a keyword on their resume gets more likely a shot of their resume being seen. So this is good for the recruiter, but bad for the person applying for the job, because it's basically draw of the luck, and then it gets narrower and narrower. So not only is a computer looking at your CV, matching job descriptions and establishing a accurate match, which might not be accurate at all. The next step is a talent acquisition person looking for it for only 6 seconds. And if they like it, then it goes to an hiring manager. So you see, it gets narrower and narrower and narrower, a dark hole. So you have to be strategic when thinking about employers as well. So that brings me to my next mistake. On the left here, we see a guy in an ill-tailored suit. And this guy on the right has a well-fitted suit. So how about we start thinking about our resumes in that manner, where we say the mistake number 2 is not tailoring your resume to the job description. Okay, so what does that mean? Every time you want to be able to write a resume and you don't know how to match it to the job description, the simplest answer I can give you is that the clues are in the job description itself. What does that mean? You can figure out from the job description what qualities are important to the employer. What is the employer's mission? You can also look at that from their website. You can figure out how you can align yourself with that job description. And then we're going to take a look how. Okay, so how can we decipher what the clues are in the job description? So let's look over here. We're going to take a look at a particular job for a scientist position. Okay, and we're going to go over it bit by bit. This is how I would approach dissecting and teasing apart a job description. So here we're looking for an employer called Veer Biotechnology that is looking for a a scientist position in immunology. Now, don't worry so much about the title and the job description if it's not your field. This applies to mostly every job that you can think of, okay? So they're looking for a scientist who specializes in immunology. In the very first paragraph here, I start highlighting what is important to the employer. For example, they are into cutting edge technologies. And then I start reading their language. Their language are our current development pipeline. Now, as a PhD student or postdoc, we don't really talk about pipelines or candidates or product development, right? So we're trying to get a feel for their language. And then here they're looking for someone who's motivated. So, okay, hint, hint, I need to show my motivations in my CV. They're looking for someone maybe with a tumor immunology background, don't really have that. And then they're expecting the person to manage scientists. So now as PhD students and postdocs, we don't really have the title of manager, but we have managerial skills. So how are we going to translate that into our resume? Further down the line, under responsibilities, and I'm going to focus in a little bit more on the responsibilities. They're looking for someone who can manage project timelines, who can present their work, for example, who provides mentorship to scientists and research associates. So more and more, I'm getting the sense that they are looking for someone with time management skills, teamwork skills, and presentation skills. Okay, so I've gotten thus far with this blue box and with this green box. Now I'm going to go into the technical part of it. Under the qualifications and experience, they're looking for someone whose technical skills are in these different instrumentations, flow cytometry, some assays, some systems biology is required. And then if I read even more, they're looking for someone who might be a critical thinker, who has great organizational skills and great communication skills. So do we or do we not have those hints, right? We have those hints. So we'll come back to this in a second. So I'm going to go back, clear all these markings, and then we're going to go back to the original PowerPoint. So we looked at the job description, right? And what we did was we prioritized what the employer wants. Let's go back over here. We prioritize what the employer wants. And so what we do now with our CV is we further start to move sections. Okay, for example, we realize that maybe the awards and honors section, I'm just moving the polls thing off the screen, but the awards and honors section are not quite important to this employer. So what we're going to do is we're possibly going to move that section off, and we're going to move the research experience down because we realized in our analysis of the job description that probably technical skills should go up higher on the agenda, right? So what have we done so far? Again, we have prioritized what is important to the employer, and we're starting to think from the employer's perspective. So at this point, we're looking at the perspective, but we're also starting to veer into the realm of content development. Okay. And what that means is, let's look at content. You guys saw the job description, and we identified and dissected what is important for that particular job description to the employer. We realized that time management was one of the important qualities that the employer is looking for. In fact, in their job description, they give you a hint as to what they want to see. Look at the red section here. Maintains project timelines, okay, and actively participates in team meetings. So there's two things here: teamwork that they're looking for, and they're looking for someone who maintains project timelines. So in that case, in my own resume, I didn't have anything talking about time management. So now in red, I'm going to add the sentence, manage multiple projects and meet laboratory goals and deadlines in a timely manner. So that way I have aligned what they're looking for with the job description, and I put that in my resume. Now let's focus on the purple part, teamwork. Here, they talk about teamwork because we dissected the job description. We realized teamwork is important. So then what we do is, in the purple, they give you a hint. They say, present scientific work at internal meetings, communication skills, and potential partners. So they have partners, which means teamwork is important to them. Also here, they say, may provide scientific mentorship to scientists and research associates. So this is a leadership skill, but it's also a teamwork skill because you're going to be working with a team of research associates. So in this section here, originally I had worked as a team member with scientists from varied teams. That makes no sense. So I'm going to change it to make it more compelling. And I'm going to say, establish critical collaborations with multidisciplinary teams of scientists, leading to 4 co-author publications and grant funding of certain dollars, because that was a result of my collaboration. So does that make sense to everybody? And I can see your head nodding, but hopefully it does, and you can share with me if that makes sense in the chat section. So that's what I mean by aligning yourself with the job description. Okay. Which brings me to another aspect of content. The mistake we make in when we create our CV or our resumes is underselling our accomplishments. And on the other hand, the opposite end of that spectrum is exaggerating our accomplishments. And neither is what we want to do. But for this section, I'm going to focus on understanding how not to undersell our accomplishments. So for that matter, I want to emphasize to you right now that your resume has to tell your story. Okay. Like any good story, the story has to be compelling. Like any story, the story need not be perfect. There is no such thing as a perfect resume. There is no such thing as a perfect candidate. And good recruiters and good talent acquisition folks realize that. Nevertheless, your story needs to be interesting, okay? And it needs to be obviously like we saw with Leonardo da Vinci, it needs to be relevant to the employer's needs. So what do I mean by interesting? Let's look at what a boring story looks like versus a compelling story. Now, in my resume early on, I simply stated, studied the immunogenicity of naturally derived drug products as something listed there. How about instead, we change that sentence and make it more compelling to say, independently studied the immunogenicity of naturally derived drug products to ensure the efficacy and safety of life-saving therapies. Now that's more compelling, and um, you guys can let me know if you think that was compelling. I'm gonna run that poll right now, okay? And you can keep putting in your polls as I ask the rest of the questions. Instead of saying writing manuscripts, right? Instead of saying that, what if we said excellent communication skills as evidenced by authoring and co-authoring 12 peer-reviewed manuscripts? Was that more compelling? If you have ever helped junior scientists or undergrads in your lab, instead of saying helped scientists in the lab, led a group of 3 undergraduate, 2 graduate students in the lab, leading to the completion of time-sensitive research projects. And I hope at this point you kind of see what I'm trying to do in crafting this compelling story rather than a boring story. Under the awards and honors section, the person simply listed their award, Dean C. Banhart Award. I have no idea what that award meant or what that award means to me as an employer. So let's say this. The recipient of the Dean C. Barnard Award, $1,500 for excellence in research, which was essentially the title of that award. But I failed to put it in my CV, and so I've lost that compelling part of that story. Okay, so Gasper says, is there a way to game the system? What does game the system means, Gasper? You can send me that message little separately, privately, or to the group. And don't these sentences make the resume very lengthy? Yes and no. These sentences can be pared down. If you only have 2 to 3 bullet points, this doesn't necessarily have to make the sentence lengthy if you have only 2 to 3 bullet points under each section. As long as it's impactful and you're covering a vast aspect of your skill set, then it doesn't necessarily have to come across as lengthy. You can definitely start paring them down as well. This is for a person who, I'm speaking on behalf of someone who doesn't have a lot or to put in the resume and who wants it to be specifically tailored for a particular position. These are just suggestions. So feel free to cut down words and cut down sections as long as what comes across to the employer is that it is impactful. All right. So what did I say? I said your story should be interesting, relevant to the employer, right? But most of all, and I can't emphasize this enough, your story should be true. What I mean by that, why I'm sharing that, is because I have had experience with postdocs at my previous position who exaggerated. For example, they didn't have any conference attendance at a particular, they didn't have any chance to go to any conference. This is partly on their PI. But they went ahead and just made up a conference and said that they attended it and that they gave a keynote speech during that conference. And that is untrue. And finally, that came around and sort of bit them in the butt because their PI found out during the reference check. It was a whole mess. And so there is something to consider, which is the ethics of resume writing as well. Tell your story, make it interesting, make it compelling, but your story should definitely be true. Brings me to the next mistake, using something called buzzwords instead of using keywords. So remember that ATS system tracks keywords which are relevant to the job description. You want to not use something called buzzwords, and I'll talk about what buzzwords are. You want to, in your CV, use action words. And I'll give you an example of what an action word is. Use impactful words. A resume is basically a bunch of words and sentences, right? So your words have to be very carefully thought out. Don't just list responsibilities or rattle off buzzwords because it sounds good to your ear. A seasoned employer, a seasoned recruiter can really read through the BS in the first 5 seconds. Demonstrate and provide evidence of your skill set. Okay, so don't just state I'm a go-getter. State how you're a go-getter. Give me evidence of that fact. All right, let me look at the chat box because we have a question. So someone says, Tao says, I won Best Poster Award 2 times at the same conference. Can I list it as 2 times Best Poster Award to save space on the resume? Answer is yes, yes, yes. You can find creative ways, maybe say 2x or maybe put the years like 2012 and 2013. And you can do that to save space in the resume, definitely. So the answer is yes. So let's go back, for example, for now to talk about what these buzzwords are. Okay, so buzzwords are words that employers, career services folks like me see over and over and over again in the resumes that are really just, instead of buzzwords, are just basically buzzkill. And these comprise of words such as I'm great, I'm a hard worker, I'm a team player, I'm a critical thinker, I'm innovative. Everyone says these things. Everyone talks about how they're a go-getter. And these are obvious skill sets. If you're obviously you've had a PhD and you're graduating with a PhD or a postdoc, you're probably all these things. But this means nothing on a resume if you can back it up with evidence of how you're a go-getter, with evidence of leadership skills, with evidence of creativity. So for this section, I'd say lose the buzzwords, but keep the keywords. And there are many keywords that you could use that really make a difference in how you word your resume. For example, improved, achieved, increased. So say you were working in a company for a while and you increase the percent engagement. Calculate how many people engaged with your product. So increase 30% or 40%. And if you say directed, how many students did you direct? What did you direct? Okay. So you want to be able to use these words: inspired, mentored, guided, fostered, shared. And these are called keywords rather than buzzwords. And what you need to do with these words, they don't stand alone. You need to be able to quantify as much as possible in your resume. You want to provide proof of the work that you've done, and you want to use something called a PPI method. And what that is, and this is where Gasper, this sort of comes into play, is how to craft your CV without making it too lengthy but still being impactful. So what is a PPI method? In a sentence, you have to think of the best way to state your project, indicate its purpose, and then imply its impact. This is the same formula you would use even for a interview. This is called the STAR technique, where you would, if you were ever interviewed, you would use the STAR technique, which is stating the situation, telling the interviewer what your action was to solve the problem, and then ending with the result. So same thing. Instead of me saying I just studied the immunogenicity of naturally derived products, let's divide this into project, purpose, and impact. Study the immunogenicity of naturally derived products, okay? And then here in the blue box, to ensure the efficacy and safety of life-saving therapies. So not only have I stated my project, I have stated the purpose and the impact of the project. And because I'm a little fancy, I also add this yellow box where I say I studied that using cutting edge cell culture assays because I know that the employer is looking for someone who has cell culture assay experience. So this can go in the body of your work, or it can go in your professional summary where you list 2 or 3 bullet points right on top of the best work that you've ever done. So I have a question in the chat box from Shantanu that says, how does one provide evidence of soft skills like time management, for example? Good question. So very often, your soft skills through the examples and evidence that you have stated in your CV, for example, completed the project within deadlines, or completed a project in a timely manner, implies that you have time management skills. Or if you word it in a way that says managed multiple projects, shows that implies that you have time management skills. An alternative to using a sentence to deduce, for the employer to deduce or to imply, is having a section called transferable skills. And that's completely okay to do. Suppose you're applying for a consulting position, and the 3 things the consulting position wants you to state is time management skills, communication, analytical skills. You can have a section called transferable skills and you list that, like time management. You say you handle multiple projects. Or communication skills. You say authored 3 papers, presented in 4 conferences, present every week at lab meeting. And that itself will indicate to the employer that you have time management, analytical, communication skills. So you can be creative in the way that you want to present it, or you can be very explicit and say transferable skills, a separate section, and then list the list of transferable skills. It's totally okay to do that as well. If I didn't answer your question now and fully, and if you have more questions, we'll open it up to the end as well. So keep this in mind. Make sure that your purpose and impact is very evident. You can either state it like I have very clearly, or it can be very implied, that shows all these skills as well. So in my experience for the past few years, from dealing with other people's resumes and my own, I think there's a formula for this. And this formula applies for all sorts of job search strategies, whether that's looking for an informational interview, whether that's an interview itself, whether that's strategizing about your LinkedIn page. Okay, so first you want to do is you want to dissect the job description, like the way we did in the beginning. Now that you know what's important to the employer, you want to be able to prioritize your skills that match the job. So again, you don't want to list 100 publications if publications are not important to the job. That combined with the right use of action words, again, a winning formula, minus the fluff or jargon or lengthy words, because that doesn't mean that that's impressive, equals an impactful and impressive resume. And so that's my version of a formula in which you can use in order to create an impactful resume. So Natalie asked the question, if the average scan is just 6 seconds, it seems good to highlight keywords that are impressive. Say I have a very small role with an impressive project. Should I put something like that on my resume, a safe space for a less impressive project where I had a smaller role? Absolutely, you're right. So if you have only 6 seconds and you have to impress them because my eye is going to glance to the first professional summary section, and that's where you would want to put it. If you're applying for another job and that priorities change, then change that section to something less impressive. Move it about, like I showed you how I moved little sections around. Move it around and see what sounds like the best fit for that particular position. So should I put something like that on my resume, save the space for a less impressive project? Yes. So again, prioritize. You can either use that one for that particular job if it's great and if it's a good match that matters to the employer, or you can save the space for a less impressive project that is more in line with what the employer wants to see. But remember, very often when you're submitting resumes, you're also submitting cover letters. And a cover letter is not a exact repeat of your resume. A cover letter is a compliment. So if you didn't have a chance to put something in your resume, make sure you insert that in your cover letter. In addition, if you have a LinkedIn profile, which gives you more space and has this entire summary section, make sure your LinkedIn profile, which 90% of your employers are going to be looking at anyway, is filled with that extra information that might not be on your resume. But your resume really needs to be prioritized. So Gasper at this point asked the question, what if I use acronyms that are very common in that industry? That's fine. You don't have to specify long names if that's very familiar with the industry. Go ahead, use acronyms. If they've used an acronym in the job description itself, then I don't see any problem using that acronym in your resume. So Tao says, if I have only 80% of the skills listed in the job description, is it worth the time to apply knowing my resume may not pass ATS? Okay, so this is a very important question. Again, I'll repeat the question. If I have only 80% of the skills listed in the job description, is it worth the time to apply knowing my resume may not pass the ATS? My answer to that is 80% is a hell of a good chance of getting a position in spite of ATS, because not only are you using the computerized ATS system, my plea to anyone looking for a job search is you're also using the trifecta of networking and LinkedIn profile. Okay, so you're using your LinkedIn profile to reach more people. You're networking with recruiters on LinkedIn, hopefully, and you're applying through the ATS system. So yeah, go ahead and apply for that. Even with that 80%, there's a high chance you're one of the top candidates. Again, not everyone has 100% of the skills listed in the job description. It's the way you present yourself. So Christopher, do you have any advice for a generalized resume, which is going to many employers at a job fair? Yes. So yes, you call that a master resume. And in that, you highlight, basically make it very general and vague. I would advise you to do the same, for example, for your LinkedIn profile. Your LinkedIn profile can be customized to a particular job, and recruiters are scanning your LinkedIn profile often. So LinkedIn profiles are kept pretty vague and broad and generic. Like, for example, if you're an immunologist studying microRNA or some small aspect of it, I wouldn't say microRNA scientist, I would say immunologist. So yeah, keep a master resume that's very generalized, and that could also go to potentially to many employers. But what needs to come through from the generalized employers is the skill sets that generally employers are looking for, which is communication skills, analytical skills, um, team and collaborative skills. So keep those three skills in your back of your mind when you're creating a generalized resume. Let me move forward and then come back to the other two questions that are in the chat group. So let's move on from here and go into this whole look and feel aspect now. Okay, so we're done with perspective. I've given you hints about content. We've talked about certain mistakes you could make while you're preparing your resume. And now look at some mistakes for look and feel, because if you have only a few seconds to impress someone, you don't want to make a mistake of informatting, terrible grammatical errors, or a super jazzed up resume. And what I mean by that is, in the US, generally don't put your photo on your CV and your resume. I prepared a resume for a postdoc who was heading to Denmark, and they absolutely require a photo. But in the US, there's no photo requirement. Do not state your marital status, height, weight, nationality. All that's unnecessary. It takes up space. It doesn't add value to your resume at all. So I would suggest to not add that. And very often, that practice was actually done in the early 1900s, but we don't use that anymore. And don't add any confidential information. And in terms of fonts, you want to stand out, but you don't want to stand out with fancy fonts. Fancy fonts are a big no-no. Fancy formatting is a big no-no because it's just off-putting when you're browsing through many resumes. So tips for look is you want to be able to make it very easy to read. Keep it simple. Use basic fonts like Garamond, Cambria, Times New Roman, maybe. Play around with a bunch of like very acceptable fonts, very clear fonts, and see what, if you were the hiring manager, whether this would turn you off or whether this looks great. Use size 12. Small little fonts really, when I've looked through resumes, I can't stand it. So that's an automatic no-no. And then you can use narrow margins instead of your regular default margins on Word document. Use narrow margins to create your resume. That's totally okay. So this brings me to what I was trying to share during the question and answer session is, if I led you to believe that jumping from the green block to the yellow block only included creating an excellent resume, then that was only because we're talking about resumes today. The trifecta of job search strategies include not only the resume, but a LinkedIn profile. Again, 90% of employers use LinkedIn. And you want to couple all this with networking as well. That increases your chances of getting that visibility and getting yourself seen. So while you're updating your resume, you want to be updating your LinkedIn profile, and you want your LinkedIn profile, and we're not covering cover letters today, but you want your cover letter to also complement your resume and your LinkedIn profile. So remember the trifecta. If I'm an employer, and I've done this before when I was looking through CVs, was I often check a person's social media. So obviously keep it professional. We want to make sure as employers that we're hiring all the right candidates in the right package. So people always want to look at your social media. When I applied for this new job at Hopkins, my employer, vice provost, asked me for my social media handles. So in that case, I had also made sure to change my status on my Instagram and my Twitter to reflect what my professional goals were. And I know that's a bit extreme, but I wanted to make sure, and I did that. So before we go into the question and answer session, I want to emphasize what I shared with you today, some of my observations and some of the ways in which I really want to challenge you to think about your resume. Okay. None of this is suggestions that fit all. You may have some creative ideas. You may think that some of this doesn't work for you, and that's okay. What you need to think about is understanding the basic anatomy of a resume and strategize on how to even start preparing it. Today, we've covered how to remember to think like an employer. Knowing the backstory helps you strategize better. You must absolutely customize for each job. It's a pain. Looking for a job is a job in itself, and customizing is just so annoying. But I never got job interviews for which I didn't customize. And I got frustrated instead when I sent out generic CVs, cut, copy, paste, the same CV, same resume to multiple jobs. You want to be able to, like any job related aspect, whether you're interviewing, whether you're writing a cover letter, a resume, you want to be able to tell a compelling story. Make sure you don't undersell due to imposter fears or anything else that's holding you back. And on the other hand, make sure you don't exaggerate or lie about your accomplishments. It has a way of coming back and sort of biting you in the butt, right? So use powerful action words and provide evidence of skills. Keep the formatting very simple, okay? And you don't try to jazz it up a little too much. And once we are able to conquer this trifecta of job search strategy, we do it in little baby steps. So we're here now in the green. Today we're talking about resume. In the next few weeks, we are going to talk about LinkedIn. Then we're going to talk about networking, and then we practice our interview skills. So that sort of gets you step by step strategically. And I overuse this word all the time, but it's so important from getting you from now to your interview step. Okay. So at this point, let me go back and look at chat questions. And if you want to send a chat to everyone, guys, you can do that as well. The question from Yorgos is, does the ATS system recognize the keywords only when one enters a resume as an online form? Does it work also when one submits it as a PDF? Yes. So yes, it essentially works during the online submission. That's where the ATS systems. Also, point over here is that not all companies have ATS, right? Big companies do have an ATS because they can scan that many resumes. So sometimes it is a resume reviewer, a recruiter who's looking at your CV. Sometimes it isn't. Okay. Does it also work when one submits it as a PDF? Basically, follow the instructions of what the online website's telling you. If it's saying, please submit a PDF, then yes, the ATS system is made to design in a way that can read a PDF. If it says, please make sure to upload a Word file, then make sure you're uploading a Word file. All right, so Tao says, I was told to put my citizenship status in my resume. What do you think? I see. So I don't think that's necessary unless you know that that job is specific for. They don't sponsor visas for U.S. citizens, but even before, like when you're doing the pre-screening while you're applying for the website, if a job doesn't want a non-U.S. citizen to apply for it, it will have a question that says, "Are you a citizen? Do you require sponsorship?" So in that session, you've already answered that question. Don't sort of put that on there. Sometimes when you're the right candidate, a person is willing to go that extra step and sponsor a job. It might be a pain for them to go through those extra steps, but if you're the right candidate, they want to be able to do that to you. So I wouldn't put my citizenship status up there and automatically disqualify my chance from myself from getting a chance to actually be sponsored. So don't put it on there, is my opinion. Christopher says, is it appropriate to list a PhD on the resume with an expected date under education? Yes, of course. Yeah. If you have not completed your thing, you can definitely say expected date. For example, if you have also if you have a manuscript in preparation, it's okay to say in preparation. How do you signal to an employer that you expect to finish a PhD before working with them? You would say that in multiple ways. You would say expected. You would mention that in the cover letter. You would follow that up in an email. After you apply, you email the recruiter, find out who the recruiter is or the hiring manager. You would state it there, and you would state it in your phone screen. Like they look at your CV or your resume, they love it, they call you up for a phone screen, and that's when you tell them, I expect to finish my PhD in the next 6 months. So there's multiple steps to this process, so don't fret too much about when to convey that to the employer. So Nanda says, in addition to LinkedIn, is it necessary to share other social media accounts with the employer? LinkedIn depends really. If you're looking for like more academic positions, then a lot of academics have websites, so that can go up there, your personal website. If you're looking for industry, it's just advisable to put a LinkedIn page on there as well. So Shantanu, I've received comments like, we are looking for generalists with a demonstrated ability to specialize in different fields. How do we as specialists with PhD address such questions? Okay, so if that's the question that the employer is asking for, that is, they want someone who's a generalist, then for sure present a generalist CV. But then how do you demonstrate your ability to specialize in different fields? How do we as specialists address such comments? Give them what they want. If they want a general CV, give them what they want. If you want to specify your specialization, do it in the first paragraph, which is your professional summary. So be very general, and in the second bullet point, say with a specialty in, and you can share that that specialty as well. So Shantanu, I hope I answered that question. You can ask me separately as well, but Tuan asks, how many pages is good for a CV? So again, I want to emphasize the resume is 1 to 2 pages. A CV generally acceptable to go 3, 4, and if you're doing like an NIH biosketch, it goes longer. 5 pages is fine. But I would say on an average, if you're a postdoc or a PhD applying for an academic position using a CV, then keep it to 3 to 4 of max 5 pages, and that's about it. All right, so any other questions? Anybody bold enough to turn on their video call? And that leaves, don't leave me alone in being the person to share my video if you have any other questions. Gasper says, when is it appropriate to go to 2 pages? For a resume, it's totally appropriate to be at 2 pages. You don't have to keep your resume to 1 page. 2 pages is totally appropriate. Even if you go beyond 1 page, it's totally fine. People expect more than 2 pages. I think for PhDs and postdocs, I'm not a fan of seeing just 1 page because I know you did more than 1 page. Any other questions?
I have a question
Yes.
over video, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
So before, I'm wondering how far back should I list my work history? I was a lab technician before I was a graduate student. Is that worth listing, or is that just a waste of my time? Thanks.
Before grad student, you said you were
Yes.
So if it's relevant to the job,
Okay.
and you're applying for a job that's going to employ those skills, then definitely mention it.
Okay.
You don't want to go all the way back to high school. Like for me, I had many leadership positions in high school, and I left that out of the question because that's just too far back. But if there was something relevant even back in undergrad and I'm applying for a job now, because it's undergrad and it was super relevant to what I'm applying for, I would include it. It's fine.
Sounds good. My other question is, on the summary section, how specific are people usually?
So it depends. So again, it depends on what position you're applying for. For example, some people here have mentioned that if they want a generalist CV, then definitely go ahead and make it very vague and general. Especially say if I'm an immunologist and the job says also looking for either an immunologist or a molecular biologist, then I want to keep it very vague because I could be in either category. But you want to be very specific in the skill sets you're highlighting in that summary section. You want to be very specific. If a job is looking for communication skills, and that's that top list of what they're looking for, then you have to be very specific in how you're good at communication skills in that very top section.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Is it necessary to include a resume if you have a cover letter and CV included in the case of a faculty application? So no, you don't have to submit multiple documents. If the faculty application is talking about cover letter and CV, then that's what you send. You don't have to include a resume. If you are interested in faculty applications, then come to the session on April 8th that's hosted by Kelly Clark, which is specifically on academic CVs. Sorry if I missed your presentation. Do we need to include referees in the CV? So if you're talking about a resume, please don't include references. There's no space for it. If you're talking about a CV, then I would have like just the names and the phone number. Don't spend so much space and time listing all your references in a straight line because that's going to take away space. All right, so if the CV is 1.5 pages, should I make it 2 pages? You don't have to drag it out to 2 pages if all you've conveyed fits in 1.5 pages. But if you want to use the extra space to showcase more of your skill set, gladly go ahead and make it up to 2 pages. Gasper says, as engineers, my lab doesn't focus too much on publications. Rather, we work on grants. How can I balance this fact in the resume? So you could put grants down as a separate section and ignore this publication section totally. In fact, if a job that you're applying for is interested in your grant writing ability, then move that section up a little higher on your resume. If grants are not so much a priority, then move that section down later on. But either way, what does grant fall under? Grants fall under collaborative skills and written communication skills. So if you have a section called communication skills or even a section called collaboration, and that's important to that job, then include that grants under that section. Okay. You're welcome, guys. You're saying thank you. You're welcome. And Raghavendra says, can resume be more than 2 pages, like 3 to 4 pages? No, because then you're veering off into the category of a CV, and a CV is 3 to 4 pages. If a job says send your CV, then send a 3 to 4 page CV. If a job says send a resume, then you want it to be 2 pages because there's a distinction between a CV and a resume. However, for those who stayed, there is always something called a hybrid CV resume, where an industry says send a CV or a resume. In that case, smush the two together. Don't make a long CV, 5 to 6 pages. Don't make a short resume, 1 page. You can have a 3 to 4 hybrid as well. And very often that's more relevant to bench scientist position or government positions. So if you're a scientist, you're applying as a scientist to government or a particular industry as a bench scientist, then the hybrid versions are also acceptable. Okay, read the job description carefully. Anything else? You guys, I'm gonna ask you to please fill out a survey, if possible, to let me know how the virtual sessions are going. So Gasper says, will I be revising resumes? Yes, I do that a lot. I revise and I send a draft back to you, and then you work on what are my comments and suggestions, and then yes, it's free. Yes, my office is particularly to help you grad students, PhD students, and postdocs. So yes, if you have any specific career strategy that you want to discuss, you want your resume to be reviewed, then yeah, send it to me. I also do mock interviews in the next few weeks. So if you want to practice your interviewing skills as well, then feel free to let me know and I'll let you know when that's happening. Also, if you're asking LinkedIn related questions, we are going to be doing a LinkedIn session in a few weeks. And some people have said that I should probably work for LinkedIn because I talk about LinkedIn so much. So make sure you all participate in that LinkedIn session as well. I feel like I've done a lot of talking, you guys. Do you have
Hi, Roshni, I've
any
got a
other
video
questions?
question.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so some employers do not ask for a PDF of a resume. Instead, they might ask you to fill up an online form on an application portal. And I've noticed that sometimes they do not have the sections which I might feel are pertinent to the job. So, for example, they don't particularly care about publications, and 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 so I think that I might be shortchanging myself if I were applying only based on what the form asks for. Then what do I do in such cases? Thank you.
So you feel like you're not showcasing your entire skill set, and so
Yeah.
what do you do when they're not even asking you those questions?
Mhm.
So ask what the form is asking you to fill out. These forms are asking you to basically fill out a particular set of already established questions. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to your GPA and the courses that you might have taken.
Those particular jobs that you're applying to, that's what matters to them.
Right.
Right. So do that. But I'm a little extra and I try to teach people to be a little extra. So if I know which company I'm applying to and I have the CV resume prepared, I'm going to now track down a person from that company via, say, LinkedIn or find the recruiting manager, and I'm going to send my CV, my resume to them through LinkedIn as well. So I will find either like hiring manager. I've even messaged someone called, I've even messaged the executive vice president of a company before. As long as you get visibility, I don't want you all to get lost in the the applying blindly and then getting frustrated cycle, because very often when you're applying to these online portals, your resume gets lost in a bunch and in a pile. So do that, answer the questions that they're asking you, and if you feel like you need them to see your resume because that's where the meat and bones are, then go ahead and find a way to send that resume. Often in those forms, I hope they have even like an attached file. So if you can attach file, if they do have that, please go ahead and do that extra work as well.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Undergrad international GPAs are usually much lower than those in the US. How can we state our GPA without it looking like it's really low? So you can explain what the scale is. So in your resume, explain that, I don't know, are you from Israel? Explain like Israeli scale or the scale of your country and say this is out of 10 or this is out of 9 and this is why my GPA looks like this. So you can say out of 3.4 out of 4 of 9.9 out of 11. Like you please state it there in the side. So how can we find a hiring manager information if it's not listed on the LinkedIn job posting and on the website job description? Good question. In that case, you can't. You can't, but you can try different tricks, which hopefully you will come to the LinkedIn sessions and I can share with you certain tricks on how to find people who work at the company that'll pay you some attention. So sometimes, yeah, you can find someone who's listed and then you might have to send it to someone else, or you may want to get a free trial of LinkedIn Premium, which sometimes allows you to see who posted the job and send an email message. So there are some ways to go about that, but we can cover that on LinkedIn, on the LinkedIn topic if you want. Any other questions? 37 of you are still here. Okay. If there are no more questions, please feel free to evaluate how virtual workshops work. We all don't know, we're all in uncharted territory. So please let me know what you think of virtual workshops and whether we should continue doing this in the future as well. But any other questions, I'm open for the next 2 minutes. If not, I'm going to end the meeting. If you do have questions, you're very welcome. If you do have questions, just send me an email and we'll talk over the course of the next few weeks. All right. Bye, everyone. You're welcome, Kyle.